What's going on, guys? It's the Clown Review, and we're back with another video and another review of Netflix's Series of Unfortunate Events. Today, I'll be reviewing episodes 3 and 4 of Season 2, which constitute the 6th book of the series, titled The Ersatz Elevator. Before I get into the video, I would really appreciate it if you like the video and subscribe, and if you have any feedback you want to give, please feel free to leave it down in the comments. After Lemony Snicket gives his normal opening narration, we begin once again with Mr. Poe driving the Baudelaires to their next guardian, who is another set of their parents' friends, who of course they've never met. And I must admit, I'm getting a bit sick of this formula here. I mean, we've already done this, we did it for half of the first season. I guess the school was a technical guardian, but I guess they kind of broke the formula in the last episode of the first season, which I really liked. And the last two have also been kind of different, so I don't really like that we're going back to this formula. However, it's clear right off the bat that this is going to be a bit different, at least, because the main priority is not trying to figure out what's going on with the Guardians. It's not the Guardians at all. The main priority for the Baudelaires is finding the Quagmires, which is basically what drives them this entire episode. And as you're probably going to see, they're going to be more on the offensive in this episode than the previous ones, which I think is a nice twist. So we start off with Mr. Poe giving us another example of the blithering idiot he is, and walking straight into a random pole and getting a nosebleed, as he probably deserves. Basically, the new people that are taking them in are really, really rich, and they live in a very fashionable block. And also, now after the Quagmire kidnapping, the entire city is after Count Olaf, and there are posters everywhere. So you'd think, hopefully, the Baudelaires will get a little more help this time, instead of having only Mr. Poe to rely on to tell that it's Count Olaf, and Mr. Poe doesn't see anything. We also get a few tidbits about nervousness versus anxiousness and the difference between the two. So we then enter the building. It's a really tall building, and the Baudelaires are going to basically be living in the penthouse, which is obviously all the way at the top. But immediately, of course, they're not able to use the elevator because the elevator is quote unquote out, as in like out of fashion, not out of order, and the stairs are in as like in fashion. And at this point, I think it's worth noting, yes, it's going to be that kind of episode. And a lot of the people in this episode are very pretentious and very annoying. And the worst part of this is a lot of the episodes here, I like that they have this timeless and settingless feel. This could take place anytime, any place. And ironically, this episode, I would argue, is probably the most crazy out of any of them. And it also feels the most real, which kind of scares me. So much to everyone's pleasure, the doorman at the bottom kicks Mr. Poe out, and Mr. Poe basically is telling them, "Hey, I'm gonna be in a helicopter looking for the Quagmires because, as I said, even though there's now a citywide manhunt for Count Olaf, now apparently the bank is sponsoring every effort to help bring the Quagmires in as well." And I do wonder, how did a bank get so involved in criminal affairs and orphan affairs? I mean, I'm like, look, I get it. Mr. Poe was supposed to be in charge of everything that the Baudelaire family owns, but how did the bank you worked for? I mean, it's just a bank. They're not like a municipal agency or anything. But I digress. So the Baudelaires have to walk up about 50 flights of stairs, and while they're walking, they see the what is it? It's the eye logo, the thing that Count Olaf has on his ankle, and we see it everywhere. We see it literally reflected at the bottom of all the stairs in one of the lounges. We see it on the walls. It's everywhere. So that implies that, like the previous Guardians, there will be some sort of connection. But obviously, the Baudelaires don't really care about that anymore. They're just searching for their friends now. That's pretty much all they care about. And they finally, eventually, after a long time, reach the top of the staircase to the penthouse. Along the way, we do get again a few more tidbits by Lemony Snicket about what it means to be in the dark, which I thought was interesting. There's about being literally in the dark and about being in the dark, as in not knowing a lot of things. There being a lot of secrets hidden, and of course, there are a lot of secrets in this episode. And this episode, out of any of them, probably does the most to start dropping hints for the mysteries in the future. So they reach the top and they meet their new guardian, and his name is Jerome Squalor. The family they're staying with is Squalors. He greets them. He seems pretty happy to see them. And before he greets them, though, something very important happens. Klaus notices that there's actually two elevators on the top floor, and on every other floor there was only one, but there's a second one here, which seems pretty suspicious. But their new guardian meets them, introduces them, kind of brings them in. He's very happy to meet them. He's really enthusiastic, and he then gives them basically non-alcoholic martinis, which is basically just water with an olive in it, as he says. And he seems like a pretty normal guy at first, and I think throughout the entire episode, he is pretty normal. But what I want to talk about here is that they do this whole in and out thing again, and it's really annoying. It throughout the entire episode. I get it; it's the point. This episode includes a lot of living in high society and a lot of rich people, and it portrays them as being kind of snobbish and just really pretentious, like I said earlier, and I get that's the point. But at a certain point in time, if that's what it's trying to convey, there's a certain point where I have to realize, is it worth it? Because it really annoys the hell out of me whenever they say this thing is in, you can't do this. This thing is out, you can't be out. You have to be in. It's like that thing. Whenever they do that, it's really annoying. And this is only the beginning. So Jerome basically introduces himself to them, and unfortunately, he, unlike Uncle Monty and Aunt Josephine, does not have that same connection. He doesn't have a spyglass or the book that they both had. Well, Uncle Monty, we haven't seen him yet, but he probably had one. And he doesn't have that kind of connection with their parents. His connection was just they were friends a long time ago, and then they just lost touch. It's not the he is not part of this same organization that they were all part of. And then we finally meet his wife, who is the embodiment of everything I just spent the last minute describing, in terms of being rich and pretentious and being really annoying in terms of always describing what's in and what's out, which annoys the hell out of me the whole episode. But we're introduced to his wife, Esme Squalor, and I'm just going to spoil this because the trailer's already spoiled it. Yes, obviously she's the villain. She's evil. And, I mean, I think the way they handle it is really good. But it was incredibly telegraphed, in my opinion, especially because the trailers basically gave it away if you watch the trailers. But obviously that's not revealed yet and isn't revealed for a really long time until a lot later in the episode. So let's just talk about Esme for a bit. So she's immediately what you'd think of as the stereotypical rich person. And she's not like incredibly snobbish. I did talk about how a lot of people in this episode are snobbish, but she's not like that snobbish. She just feels like makes herself feel larger than life. She makes herself feel really important and props herself up on a stage, but she does it in a way where she doesn't sound like incredibly arrogant. She just sounds really self-obsessed and off-putting, which I know those two things sound similar, but I kind of see a bit of a difference there. But for now, Esme seems to basically care more about making sure the orphans fit into her view and her lifestyle, because she has the typical rich person lifestyle, and she obviously cares about her image and popularity more than anything, and of course what's in and what's out. So she really, like, when the only time the orphans really get to speak is when they kind of get to bring up, we are kind of worried about our friends, and she's just like, don't worry about it, we'll take them in if we have to. But obviously, the Baudelaires are kind of hoping that they would actually be like the previous Guardians, and they would actually have this mysterious past that they know their parents and the Quagmires were both part of, and that would be able to help them and maybe find the Quagmires. But obviously, the Squalors aren't going to be that helpful, and we've figured that out pretty quickly. So immediately, The next thing is set off, and again, this is really annoying. The way the plot moves is really annoying, but I guess we have to deal with it. Basically, this random newspaper is dropped in. By the way, I don't know how this newspaper guy goes everywhere. There's this guy on a newspaper bike. This continues throughout the series that somehow drops newspapers in everywhere, and we're obviously the newspaper says dark is out, light is in, and everything right now is just the curtains are closed, the trees are making everything dark, and everything, all the stairs are dark, everything's dark, and now all of a sudden, Esme, being the one that cares about her image more than anything, decides, hey, we need to go. She panics and goes like, we need to change everything, we need to make everything light, and she basically says, here, you guys go open the curtains. And so we finally get the orphans with a bit of time to themselves. And I gotta say, in this episode, I do like the cuts between the story and the Baudelaires being by themselves. And you can see kind of like the two different sides of them there, like what they show off to everyone else and how they are by themselves. And in some of the previous episodes, there wasn't much of a difference, but now we see with them having their own agenda and the others not really being able to help them, we see there is a bit of a difference now. So the Baudelaires basically walk towards the curtains and go like, well, I mean, they're not going to help us much, and Count Olaf could just be getting further away with the Quagmires. And right on cue, they open the curtain, and they're just literally walking towards it, and right there is Count Olaf. And I gotta say, this is his best entrance and most surprising by far. I said that in the last episode, but this one takes the cake. They just, like, Count Olaf could be getting further and further away, and then open the curtain, and he's right there. And I gotta admit, I gotta give it to him. He's an actor, and this is literally opening the curtain and opening the show. So Olaf is basically right there, and of course, this one they're actually really surprised because it doesn't feel inevitable like last time. It feels really quick. In fact, I think out of all the episodes, even including the first one, this is the earliest Olaf has shown up, which put me off at a bit. I was like, huh, wait, why is this? And you'll see why later. They do this for a reason, which the reason they do this I don't like, but Olaf is right there, and again, he does his normal thing, and obviously, we get the tension between them. They're obviously their hatred for Olaf has even increased now. They're basically Olaf accidentally basically gives away kind of where the Quagmires are. He says, "I thought everybody could smell wealthy orphans when they're in arm's reach." So he kind of basically confirms that he's basically here. That he can't because of this manhunt in the city. He's not able to just smuggle the Quagmires far away and out of town, but he's basically stopped here he's basically come here as a stopover, and the Quagmires are hidden somewhere around here. Which I guess we could have put that together, but he basically confirms it by saying they're in arm's reach, and he's basically mocking them, and he pokes he does normal jabs at them. It's good as usual, and his disguise is, I mean, I like this disguise. I don't like it as much as the last one, but from a practical standpoint, he's wearing a suit. It really just looks like Olaf, just more formal than he's ever looked, and his hair is groomed and everything. But his real disguise is really just boots and I guess glasses, which he's not wearing right now. So, and I don't know how glasses are gonna make anybody not recognize Count Olaf's face, but given how dumb all the adults in the world are, I wouldn't be shocked if it does. But obviously, he can't just apparently, I guess he just can't walk into the middle of town and just disguise himself. So the Baudelaires try and call their new guardians for help and go like, "Hey, Count Olaf is here. He's right here." And then like, "Wait, what? How is this possible?" And then they're right there. They march right up there, and obviously nothing happens. I think, I mean, when Olaf did his like cover up, I mean, when I first saw this, I was like, wait, what? I was confused, and then it took me a few seconds to realize how incredibly ridiculous it is, and I'm like, oh no, he can't actually be doing this. They can't actually be falling for this. And what he does is he puts on the glasses. That's really his only disguise. And he takes out a random poster, one of the posters of Count Olaf, signs it, Count Olaf, and literally puts it up. So when he says when the Baudelaires are saying Count Olaf is here, he's like, yes, they're right. Count Olaf is here, and he literally pulls down the poster. It's like, clearly that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about him, and they try getting this across, and obviously they don't get listened to. Even though these are the new Guardians, and Jerome seems pretty sincere. He's like, they're obviously, I guess they somehow buy this, that they're talking about the poster, and Olaf, I guess they're distracted by this random poster and the fact that there's this random guy here. Now we know Esme is evil, and she's working with him. I kind of already spoiled that, and so did the trailers. So fine, we'll give that a pass, because obviously she's not going to just call him out right there. But Jerome is right there, and for some reason, he doesn't see anything suspicious, and Esme basically says, this is where we kind of get the hints that something might be going on there with Esme when she basically makes Olaf's excuse, like she's like, I told you, Gunther, I guess is the name of this guy. They pronounce it Gunther. I call it Gunther. That he would need to hide behind the curtains, and apparently he's going to be the auctioneer for some big auction that's going to take place in the next day, that tomorrow, basically, in terms of what the story would be. And he actually buys it. I mean, he suspects nothing, and that's kind of his character. I mean, he's a pushover. He's a pushover. We find out later, he doesn't have courage. He's really frightened. He's kind of just laid back kind of guy. Laid back, wants to be a good person, wants to be a good guardian, wants to be a good husband, but he doesn't really see what his wife's doing, and he doesn't see her true colors, and he's also just too scared to do anything, even when he can see something's wrong. And I guess right now he's just blind to the fact that, and he just believes, oh yeah, this guy is this guy. He's an auctioneer, and Olaf's actual disguise is being a foreigner, which he just speaks in this accent that I find both ridiculous and funny at times. But this is also my next complaint. So, out of all of Count Olaf's disguises, this is by far the most annoying. I mean, I know all of them are supposed to be annoying to a bit of an extent. I mean, all of them are funny and annoying, and I feel like those two sometimes go hand in hand. But this one is just the balance of funny and annoying. I mean, it's just off. I mean, the last one, yeah, it could sound, it depends on how you look at it, it could sound annoying, but the Coach Genghis disguise, I feel like his quote-unquote annoyance was really just him roasting the Baudelaires, which I absolutely thought fit within his character. In this, it's just he's being annoying. He's just like, hello, I am a foreigner, blah, 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 blah. And he says all these ridiculous things, which of course everybody believes. At one point later in the story, he says he's allergic to orphans, and people actually buy it. I mean, God, at this point, it's become so much of a trope that he's basically just mocking them at this point. He's basically mocking the story at this point, like, yes, I can do all this and all this and all this, and they still won't recognize me. That's how stupid everyone is. So basically, the Baudelaires are basically then just sent out because apparently their clothes are not quote unquote in enough, and they have to change into suits. Jerome basically escorts them. He tells them a bit about the place they're in, that there are a lot of places that there are like 71 rooms or something. There are a lot of places to hide, and the Baudelaires immediately jump to, okay, Olaf could easily just be hiding the Quagmires in one of the rooms in this massive penthouse. It'd be pretty easy to hide them, and there are a lot of places, so it'd be pretty hard to find them. So Jerome basically escorts them in for the Baudelaires to change into their suits, and this is where they go through their whole thought process and realize, okay, we have to find some way to search this entire penthouse, and obviously keep the squalors and everyone distracted. So what they do is they split up. Klaus and Sonny basically go back, and they see Olaf basically messing with the Squallers. He basically does this whole trick with, I guess basically he gets away with carrying around his knife by basically embedding a blade into the staff that he uses as a cane, and then because he looks a lot older in this because he has white hair and stuff also, and he has a bit of blade in that. He opens it and like tries to cut the chandelier, and it's gonna fall right over Jerome. Klaus panics and kind of just tackles him. Obviously, Olaf was just messing with it. He wasn't going to commit murder just like that. That obviously. But this brings us to the next point, which is they try to figure out what Olaf's plan is. They obviously don't know what we know because of the trailers that Esme is evil, but they suspect like she might know who Count Olaf is, since she kind of made his excuse, and basically maybe that like she's already rich. She doesn't need their fortune, but that maybe she's falling for Count Olaf, and Count Olaf could just marry her if something happened to Jerome. And if he married her, obviously he'd be in charge of their fortune. And she seemed to be falling for Gunther, who is really Count Olaf, and Jerome being like blind to everything. And even if he knew he would be too scared, he obviously doesn't do anything. So meanwhile, Violet basically decides to search the entire penthouse, and she has a system where she basically marks off each room with a chalk after going in it and searching it. And I really like the next one. I like when the kids basically kind of use Olaf's own tactics against him, because for the entire first season, we saw how Olaf basically just exploited the hell out of the stupidity and ignorance of the adults in the story. And so the Baudelaires kind of do the same here. Like, Klaus is like, I'm sure this penthouse just has 2 or 3 rooms. And then they basically get their distraction so that the Squallers won't basically just search for Violet or think there's anything suspicious. By basically then they get a tour of their own. They get a tour, and so he basically pokes Esme's ego, and she goes like, really 2 or 3 rooms? And that kind of insults her. So she basically gives them and Olaf an entire tour of the thing, basically to kind of show off, obviously, while Violet tries to search the whole thing. We get a nice tour. It's a pretty fancy penthouse. Obviously, there are a lot of obscure and weird things in it, and Violet can't find any signs of quagmires, and we get, obviously, Count Olaf does a lot more of his insanely obvious cover-ups. It's insanely obvious that he's not who he says he is. This is where we get the whole "I'm allergic to orphans" thing, which just made me cringe a bit. I was like, they cannot actually be buying this. This episode is the height of stupidity of the adults. It's like, you can't actually be buying this. It's like in the first few episodes, at least, like, yeah, it was obvious, but it was within reason. This, I think, takes it a bit too far. I'm like, there's a difference between like ignorant or stupid adults, or adults that just won't see the obvious because they're afraid of having their egos hurt by having to listen to children, like Mr. Poe in the first season. And then there's this, and this is kind of taking it too far, I think, in my opinion at least. So they get the tour, and they can't find the Quagmires, and after everything's done, basically they have to go out. Esme decides we're going to go out to eat with Count Olaf, by the way. Count Olaf is coming along for the ride, and so it's the Baudelaires, Esme, Jerome, and Count Olaf going to eat rich people lunch, which we'll get into. That takes up so much time of the episode. And now we get to the subplot, which this time the subplot is actually the most interesting part of the episode, in my opinion. I mean, I think you guys can tell. I think all the episodes in the series are at the very worst good, but these 2 episodes. You could probably tell I don't really like them as much as the others, but this subplot is actually the most intriguing part of the entire story. So remember the librarian from the previous episode? She excused herself after not being able to stand the hypocrisy of Mr. Poe and all the adults, and she ended up finding the book, The Incomplete History of Secret Organizations, in the destroyed library. And she found it, she read it, and like, unlike the stupid adults who can't tell what's going on, She sees it and she panics, basically. She goes like, what the hell is going on? How is all this going on and nobody notices? And she basically finds out everything. Now, obviously, we don't know everything either, but the book basically is supposed to tell you everything. And of course, what does she do? So she's like, well, who the hell is supposed to be in charge of everything? And what do you know? It's I guess Mr. Poe. Remember at the end of the previous season, he got a promotion to vice principal of orphan affairs. I guess this bank, the bank Mr. Poe works for, is a lot higher in authority than most banks because it actually has some connections with the government, the local government. So, which would kind of explain why he's so involved in the citywide manhunt for Count Olaf and in rescuing the Quagmires, and why it's like he's kind of trying to rescue the Quagmire and he's the official face of that, whereas he's really just a banker. He shouldn't really be that. So, what do you know? This freaking idiot is in charge of everything. And I think Olivia is thinking we get her name. Her name is Olivia Caliban. We find that out later in this episode. What do you know? She's basically exactly in our position. She's like, oh, okay. And this is where, like, she comes to realization, like, it's because of this idiot in charge here. Like, because this idiot's in charge here and won't see a single damn thing, even when the truth is literally placed right in front of his eyes. That's probably why all these things are happening, and why everybody, both the secret agents and Count Olaf, can basically get away with anything, because Mr. Poe, the idiot he is, some idiot decided to give Mr. Poe a promotion and put him in charge of everything. Because literally, the librarian has the book. She literally goes to Mr. Poe and exposes everything. I mean, if anybody other than Mr. Poe is here, the organization is done. Its secret is out. The legal authorities know everything now. Because she literally has the book with all the secrets. Not all the secrets, it's incomplete, I guess, but with all the secrets so far introduced into the story. She literally has it. She knows about it. She's read the whole thing, and she starts ranting about it. She goes to Mr. Poe like, Mr. Poe, you're supposed to be in charge of all this. What the hell are you doing? Like, she sees the picture of the Baudelaires with Esme, and she's like, how can you let all these orphans be in charge in the hands of terrible people, which is kind of our first real first real confirmation that Esme is evil. But but the librarian doesn't yet know how dumb Mr. Poe is, and she finds out by the end of the scene, but Mr. Poe really could not care less. He keeps trying to, like, brush her off. He's like, yeah. Even though this is literally his job. I mean, he's been doing a pretty freaking terrible job. Even he knows that at this point, with the Quagmires being kidnapped, and the Quagmires were, as like we found out, were another set of orphans that he was in charge of, and he just put in the boarding school, and they've been kidnapped. The Baudelaires have been bouncing from guardian to guardian, and half of them have been murdered. I mean, he bears a lot of responsibility for this, and literally somebody comes to him with all the answers, with something that can literally tell Mr. Poe everything strange that's going on, because even he knows something strange is going on. The librarian literally shows him the answers, and he doesn't see it. She's literally she even tells him, I've come to talk to you about the plague of trouble that's caused everything between the Baudelaires, the Quagmires, and everything. She's basically going to tell him the answer to the story, which he should be trying to figure out, as he's supposed to be the legal figure in charge of this. But of course, Mr. Poe doesn't. And again, I finally realized, like, this season, why Jacqueline was stationed, like, here, and why their parents put Mr. Poe in charge of this, because Mr. Poe's the only guy that's stupid enough that he wouldn't even see a secret when it looks him in the face. So she basically gives up once Mr. Poe he basically ignores her. He throws her out. But Jacqueline is there, and she says that same line that was repeated in the previous episode. In a world too often governed by corruption and arrogance, it can be difficult to stay true to one's philosophical and literary principles. That's the same line that's been said over and over, and that's when she kind of, I guess it's a pickup line, because that's when she knows, hold up. So a lot of people are saying this now. Larry said it the other day. I'm saying it now, and, like, now this woman's saying it, and that kind of stops her, and she basically, there's kind of like a glimmer in her, when Jacqueline's eyes, she's like, this person could be useful, this librarian could be useful, and luckily Mr. Poe is too dumb to understand anything she told him. So she basically, the librarian basically panics because she's going to miss the train back to Proof Rock Prep, but Jacqueline calls Jacques Snicket, who again, as I mentioned earlier, is my favorite side character of the series, and he picks up and she basically calls him, hey, there's this librarian that we could really use as a recruit, and so they're basically going to recruit the librarian for the secret organization. So she misses it obviously, and Jock pulls up in a taxi, and and shows up right next to her, and we get a really funny interaction because she's never been to the city before. She doesn't know how taxis work, but she's a smart human being. She can still go like, I'm not going to just hop into a car with a random stranger. But obviously that's part of city life. That's how taxis work. But he knows what she's after. He kind of gets her attention by talking about the orphans, and that's when she realizes, and she says, "You're a volunteer." So I realize the word volunteer is kind of important throughout this entire series. I mean, Lemony Stick gets mentioned several times. Now she's mentioning it, and I guess the agents of this organization are volunteers because that's what she called Jock Snicket. So Jacques Snicket basically recruits her, and he's like, and she basically accepts. She's like, okay, I really want to know more about this, because when she just first shows up, she's super confused. She makes several references to what we've seen before, like the movie with the zombies from the reptile room, and she's been like interviewing a lot of people, and nobody knows what she's talking about, and includes like Mr. Poe. But Mr. Poe, obviously, he's just dumb. I mean, she literally showed him everything, and he didn't see it. So Jock Snicket basically recruits her, and we move on to the next part of the story. So after failing to find their friends, the Baudelaires, Count Olaf, Esme, and Jerome have to basically walk all the way down all those stairs, because even though I guess the elevators are back in, quote unquote, in terms of fashion, I mean, I guess they really were out of order or something, because they're not. Nobody's using the elevator for some reason, or maybe stairs are still in and elevators are still out in terms of fashion, and it's just a difference in terms of light and dark. I guess they're cutting all the trees down. We get a nice reference to Lucky Smells Lumber Mill from the 7th and 8th episode of season 1, when they're basically carting away all the lumber from the trees. I guess it's still operational. I'd have thought it would have fallen completely apart after that whole rebellion and Sir basically disappearing and Dr. Orwell dying. But I digress. And then Count Olaf continues with his annoying and kind of hilarious act, which he basically shows up and he basically makes it incredibly obvious that he's set this whole thing up. He basically made a phone call and set up the restaurant they're going to, and they all walk there. Count Olaf hides under Esme's cape for some foreigner reasons, quote unquote. And while they go into and board the limousine, obviously it's to avoid being seen because everybody's looking for Count Olaf. I guess, but I don't think that's really even necessary, because everybody's so stupid they can't even recognize Count Olaf when they see him. So yeah, he really didn't need to do that. But they all get into the limousine, and the reason I go into so much detail is this is where we transition to what I think is the better plot. And frankly, it's the main. I'm just gonna say it. This is the main plot of the story because it's an actual plot, unlike what the Baudelaires are going through. Which, funnily enough, usually the main plot is more interesting than the side plot, and that's the way it should be. But in this case, the side plot really feels like the main plot because it's an actual plot, and the main plot, nothing really happens. So the so the reason I mentioned this, like I said, was because Jacques Snicket is not an idiot, unlike everybody else in the show, and he sees this random guy under Esme's cape, and he's like, "Yeah, that's obviously Count Olaf. Nobody else would feel the need to hide under a cape while walking into 2 feet away into a limousine." And so they deduce, okay, well, the Quagmires are probably here, so we just need to have our agents keep Count Olaf and everybody else at lunch for a really, really long time, and we can search this place. Which actually is the first good idea, like, really good idea, plot-changing idea, that the adults have had this entire series. So, props to Jacques and Snicket for that. So, basically, then she tells Jacqueline, yeah, we got a new recruit. We got the librarian, and she's basically going to work with Jacques on one end, while Jacqueline and presumably, we find out later, Larry are going to work on the other end. And I guess Jacqueline is the only person that Mr. Poe will get it through his thick head to listen to when she tells him something, which I don't know, like, why she hasn't been more proactive, because if she could actually get Mr. Poe to do something, I mean, this whole story would be over a lot more quickly. But anyway, she basically convinces him to not go in a helicopter ride, which apparently he was being sent to ride in a helicopter to look for the Quagmires, which I don't know what that was whole about. They dropped that throughout this entire episode. I mean, how is going in a helicopter going to help them search for the Quagmires? Olaf's not hiding them in the middle of the street where you can just spot them from there. But anyway, I guess even the institutions know how dumb Mr. Poe is, and they're gonna send him into this helicopter to just keep him out of the way. Like, they're like, no, we have intel on this guy. Keep this guy out of the way at whatever cost. He's gonna screw everything up. He's gonna make everything worse. Make sure to just put him away on this helicopter. I'm just joking, but that's what I think. That's what my theory is. But anyway, she basically talks him out of this, so they can basically go to a fancy lunch, and Eleanor Poe goes there as well. And Eleanor Poe is even worse than Mr. Poe. I mean, she's just all about false headlines. Just she's basically the representation of modern journalism. Whatever headline, whatever you can sell as a headline, true or not, credible or not, whatever. If it basically just over sensationalize anything, do whatever it takes to get that headline and get all those clicks. Not clicks, obviously. We don't have. It's not clicks here. It's a newspaper, but you get the idea. She's basically the yellow journalist here. So they basically now Jacqueline is basically going to the restaurant, and she basically asks Mrs. Poe for basically what are the most quote unquote in restaurants, because obviously that's where Esme and Baudelaire's are going to be dining. So they all finally arrive at the restaurant, and it's a place called Herring Houdini. And of course, we go right in, and what do we see? The staff there is Count Olaf's troop, and they're all right there. And the Baudelaires are immediately like, "Yeah, we can't eat here, sorry." But obviously, Count Olaf's troop is rather raw. They don't fit with Esme's sense of style. They definitely don't. You can just see, like, their tone, the tone of their restaurant is completely different from what Esme's preferences are, and she immediately is put off by it. And what I don't get is, why didn't she just play along here? Because obviously she's trying to help Olaf. She's his accomplice, and she kind of does this whole complicated thing. I'm like, look, if you just, she basically says, this place is horrible. This is a hole in the wall place. This place has vodka martinis. That makes no sense at all. And she basically gets them out of her. She's like, we're not eating here, much to Olaf's chagrin. He's like, no, this place seems fine. And then obviously that, like, the Olaf troop is hilarious as always. They're just like, we'll give the kids a tour of the kitchen, where they will probably not be thrown into a burlap sack, blah, blah, blah. It's pretty funny. But I don't get it. Esme does this whole thing where she eventually betrays the Baudelaires. Obviously, she's evil, and she helped Olaf. But I don't really get why she couldn't have just shortened the whole process by eating here and letting the troop do the whole thing. But she said, I guess it's part of her character. Like, she's not really working for Olaf. She's her own character. She's just an accomplice, but she's gonna do whatever she wants, basically. And Jerome, he's kind of just a pushover. He doesn't say or do anything to oppose her. So she basically gets them out of there. Olaf's like, okay, can we go back to 667 Dark Avenue? I really need to get back there. And it's obviously right there. This place is pretty close by. It's like 300, 400, 500 feet away. Maybe we literally see 667 Dark Avenue in the frame. But basically what they do is they get back in the limousine. I find it hilarious how they do this. The limousine driver pulls open the other side of the car, and right across from Herring Houdini is Cafe Salmonella, which is where they're actually going to eat, and they all go there to eat. And this is kind of where I think the embodiment of the tone these entire 2 episodes is put. They spend the rest of this episode stuck in the, which is like half of the episode, just sitting and doing nothing, basically, in this cafe. And I liked a lot of the series because it was really fast moving. There was no status quo, really. The status quo was the Baudelaires moving from place to place, always trying to escape Count Olaf and just figure out, make sense of these bizarre lives they lead. But like here, the whole story's come to a complete halt, except for the side plot with Jacques Snicket. But other than that, this has come to a complete halt, and the Baudelaires basically spent 20 to 30 minutes sitting in a restaurant doing pretty much nothing, and I hate that. It's like, I mean, I would never go as far to compare it to the the casino scene in The Last Jedi. Actually, it's not 20 to 30 minutes. It's more like, it feels like 30 minutes. It's more like 15 something minutes, and they have a lot of other things in between. But like literally, like, if you know, in Star Wars The Last Jedi, I don't like that movie at all. This isn't just 30 minutes like total, including everything in between. This is like literally counted 30 minutes of screen time of the whole Finn and Rose casino subplot, just all that screen time, with only when those scenes are on screen, not like stuff in between. 30 minutes of that we all know was completely unnecessary. They just did it to push a message. Whether you want to say message or no message, I know that stuff's controversial. Whether or not you believe they want to push a message or anything, or whether it was just part of the story, we all know that was completely unnecessary. There was literally something like 10 minutes before the whole thing that if they had done that, they could have cut that entire subplot out and put actual useful stuff in there. But we know that whole Last Jedi casino subplot was entirely useless. So I don't want to get a bit off of the Last Jedi tangent here. My point is, this feels like one of the things where the plot just comes to a complete halt. They didn't need to do this. They didn't need to spend 20 minutes sitting in a cafe doing pretty much nothing. So the Baudelaires get seated, and right there we are finally reintroduced to Larry the waiter, who's been showing up quite a lot recently, and I like him. He's one of my favorite characters so far in the show. I like most of the characters in the show, actually. Most of them, all of them actually, except for Carmelita, Mr. Poe, Mr. Poe's wife, the vice principal, and maybe Aunt Josephine. Yeah, I like most of the characters, and especially Larry the waiter. So he shows up, and Olaf's basically like, Larry, not this again. I guess he's getting kind of sick of Larry showing up whenever he's at lunch and now having to deal with him. Obviously, he can't say anything because without exposing himself completely. But honestly, I really don't think it would matter given how stupid everyone is. So Larry's right there, basically, and he's like, the Baudelaire's like, he's here again. What is he doing here? I mean, every time he's here, he's trying to help us. And then Mr. Poe shows up, and he's like, and Klaus is like, Mr. Poe, if you're here, who's looking for the Quagmires? And then we get Jacqueline, and that's where the Baudelaires are tipped off. Okay, something's going on here, because Larry's here, now Jacqueline's here, and she's trying to say something to them. And I guess this is like the one time their communication fails, because I don't ever think that the Baudelaires understand what Larry and Jacqueline are trying to tell them here. They're basically trying to tell them, hey, just sit down here, help us stall Count Olaf. We're trying to search the Quagmire, the building for the Quagmire, but they never really get that through to them. They try and say like, we have a 46-course meal just for people that live in a 46-story building. That'll keep everybody until everybody's been rescued. But obviously the Baudelaires don't know about Jacques Snicket or Olivia Caliban. They don't really know that this whole thing is going on behind the scenes, and they understandably they don't really have faith in anybody else but themselves to rescue the Quagmires. And as we see later in this episode, yeah, that idea, that conception that they have is absolutely 100% true. So Jacqueline basically tries to signal to them like everything's going according to plan, and Larry's right there, and his job basically to keep them there forever. And I love seeing like Larry kind of get a bit of revenge on Count Olaf for basically stuffing him in the freezer and making him freeze for what's presumably like I think it seemed like it was a really long time, but until Jacques Snicket finally rescued him. But Larry just gives it to Count Olaf subtly, and I absolutely love it. His job basically is keep them there forever, and he basically offers them, like I said earlier, this 46-course meal that they created for Count Olaf so that they could keep him there forever, and they said like a 46-course meal designed specifically for people in a 46-story building, and Esme loves it. She loves everything about the place. She loves the decor. It looks so quote unquote into her, and Larry keeps making it slower and slower so that Jacques and Olivia have as much time as they can. Speaking of which, let's go back to them because that's the interesting part of this episode. So we get a pretty cool sequence. I like the connection these two are developing. We can see throughout these episodes that they kind of develop a friendship, pretty close friendship, and he kind of mentors her and kind of. I mean, they work pretty well together. I mean, they're both very noble people that just want to do the right thing. Olivia is more of the naive one, and Jacques is the experienced one, and he's kind of like explaining to her like and easing her into this. Like, things are more complicated than they all look. Olivia, like I said, she's the most relatable character because this is what Jacques is doing with Olivia and like mentoring her and stuff. It's kind of what this entire show has been doing to us for the last how many episodes is it now? I think it's 12. We've kind of been slowly easing into it, and now like there's this new character that's also easing into it, and now she's like finding out stuff that even the main characters don't know. So they basically climb up, search the building, and they do it in the coolest way possible. They basically use suction cups and boots, and they have a safety rope that attaches to Jacques. So basically, they're linked together, and they're climbing up the building and searching it. And this is what I kind of don't get. So how are they gonna search it? I mean, they're just climbing up. They're just gonna see it from the outside. They're not really searching the building. They're just, I guess their goal is to search all 46 floors, but that's what they make it seem like, and that's why they need so much time from Larry and Jacqueline. But I mean, why? I mean, they know Count Olaf. They saw him going with Esme. They know it's probably going to be in the penthouse, so that should be like their first place, and which would make sense why they got all these suction cups instead of climbing the stairs. But again, I don't like they're gonna search the other floors along the way, but if they wanted to search them, they should just find a way to they should just like try and get inside, which I guess they didn't want to run to the door person. But searching it by just literally looking through the windows on the outside, which is what we see them end up doing, that seems really ineffective. You're not getting to tell whether the quagmires are here or not. It's not going to tell you anything. So back to the lunch, basically, they're all still eating at lunch. Larry is serving everything, and he does this funny thing where he basically forces Olaf there. Olaf keeps trying to find every single excuse he can to leave the restaurant. He's like, I must get back to hotel where there is nothing hidden, and like he's literally telling them that where the quagmires are. He's literally telling everyone. Obviously, the secret agents obviously already know that. The Baudelaires already know that. He's telling Mr. Poe and everyone else. Obviously, they're too stupid enough to pick that up. But I digress. Olaf basically keeps trying to get out of there, and seeing Larry constantly prevent him from doing that is awesome. I mean, he does a thing where he basically takes this pitcher, he slowly pours out this entire dish, and then like when it's coming out really slowly, it takes forever, and what he does is then he puts the whole thing back up, and he puts like the thing that's pouring out, he hooks it back a second time, and so now it's pouring out at a doubly slow rate, and but it's kind of that. I bring that up because that motion right there is kind of how this whole second half of this episode feels. It's like while Larry is trying to force like them to sit through this and do pretty much nothing but eat, and Olaf basically do nothing but be bored. that's kind of how we, the audience, feel as well, because there's nothing really happening. The only thing really happening doesn't even amount to anything, which is the whole searching for the quagmires in the 667 Dark Avenue. But finally, basically, Eleanor Poe shows up, and she basically says, "Important reporter coming through. I found something that will really elevate our readership." And I believe that's what she says. And suddenly it hits Klaus when he hears the words elevate, and R, and he remembers the elevator, and he's like, "Oh, hold up a sec." And then he has an idea, and the Baudelaire is like, "Okay, we really need to get back to the hotel." And this is the next part I don't like, because Larry's right there. Klaus has basically figured out where the quagmires are. He figures out it's basically that second elevator. I mean, Larry's right there. He shows up right behind them, and he's like, "Do you think we can get back to 667 Dark Avenue?" And Larry's like, "Not until everybody has finished this meal." And he kind of looks at them like, "What are you guys doing? We're trying to help you." But it's like they figured out what you haven't figured out at this point. They have an actual location on where the quagmires are, and you're like, Larry, either the Baudelaires or Larry should have. I think in this case, why didn't the Baudelaires like try and signal to Larry? What if we know a specific location of hidden persons? I mean, everybody else is stupid. They're not, even if they tell him the message directly without coding it, they're not gonna notice. So like, or why didn't he like try to help them get back? Because if they know something, and I mean, it wouldn't be a problem if just the Baudelaires went back and they ran into Jacques and Olivia. I mean, in fact, that's probably the best case scenario to happen. So I really don't get why Larry's trying to prevent them from getting back. But basically, Count Olaf goes to Eleanor Poe, and he basically gives her a quote unquote tip, which she absolutely buys, and she gets the whole article printed. This is basically how he gets to manipulate what's quote unquote in and out. So how he basically manipulates the entire plot, and he basically gets the Daily Punctilio to print that Herring Houdini in and Cafe Salmonella out. So he gets everybody to go over to the other restaurant, but the Baudelaires smartly take this chance to escape, and they hide. It's really clever. They hide in this giant salmon thing that's part of the decor of the restaurant. And so when Olaf is basically looking for them to make sure they come along with everybody else, he can't find them. And he's like, okay, they might have gone ahead, and he basically spends the entire time looking for them while going over to the other restaurant. And then once everybody's gone, once they're sure everybody's gone, he basically leaves, and he goes to the other restaurant with everyone else. The Baudelaires are right there, and they find their way back to 6-7 Dark Avenue, which was only like 500 feet away. These things are all in the same area. I don't really see what the point of the limousine was, but I digress. So they go back to the place. Olaf and Esme and everyone else eat at Herring Houdini, where it's pretty clear that there are sleeping potions in the drinks. Jerome drinks one, even though the Baudelaires tell him, don't do this. In fact, I forgot to mention earlier, the Baudelaires try to get through to Jerome like, hey, have you seen anything suspicious about Gunther? I don't know why they don't just tell him or tell anybody, hey, this is Count Olaf, but at this point, nobody's going to believe them. I think they've understood that nobody believes that this is really Count Olaf. They can say whatever they want. They're just going to cause a scene, and it's probably just going to make things worse. And right now, that's really not what's most important to them, what everybody thinks of Olaf. They're just laser focused on trying to find the quagmires right now, which is understandable. So, but they do try and get through to Jerome, and he just thinks they're being xenophobic. And I mean, it's really infuriating when it's like, how does everybody? It's so obvious. Olaf isn't even being subtle anymore. He's literally talking about orphans hidden in the 667 Dark Avenue and trying to get back there during lunch. But nobody notices, including Jerome. And basically, Jerome basically drinks one of the things at the Herring Houdini restaurant, and obviously he falls completely asleep. And after like 20, or maybe it's unclear how much time has passed, maybe an hour more in the Houdini restaurant that's run by Count Olaf's troupe, basically Olaf finally gets Esme to leave, but Larry shows up to the rescue and basically forces Olaf. I love this part. It's basically Olaf basically has to sing in front of everybody, and Esme is like, oh wow, that's a great idea, and everybody basically wants this quote unquote foreign man to sing, including Jacqueline. And I mean, this part is stupid, it's crazy, and it kind of fits the whole tone of this episode, where they basically rally around the cry of being Secretary's Day and Jacqueline wanting him to sing. It's ridiculous. But eventually Olaf is forced to stay there instead of going back, and he delivers a musical number. And this one, it's not very good. Olaf's not a very good singer. It's okay. It's better than the one in episode 1. So I guess he's improving. But it's not very good. Neil Patrick Harris or whoever, maybe they did a voiceover in terms of the song. They did their best. And meanwhile, the Baudelaires are back at the hotel. They've climbed up all these damn stairs again, and they finally reach the top. They open the elevator, they click the button, and they realize it's not an elevator at all. It's just a shaft, or a quote-unquote Ersatz. That's what the episode is named after. And basically, they're like, okay, we have to rescue the Quagmires now, and they create this hot air balloon, but not with no heat. They basically take a basket, a bunch of strings, and a handkerchief, a large handkerchief from the from all the items that are miscellaneous in the mansion. And this is kind of cut with the singing of Count Olaf and his troop, and they go down, down until they finally reach the bottom of the elevator, and there they find the Quagmires, who are right there, and it's just like they start smiling and they see them like, yes, finally someone found us, and they're trapped in this massive cage at the bottom of the elevator shaft. The Baudelaires finally find them. Olaf is singing and he finishes a song. And this is another thing I don't like. So, right before the Baudelaires basically push their way into the elevator shaft, they get into the balloon basket, and before they fall in, they have this nice sequence where Violet's like, well, if we wait until we're ready, we'll be waiting for the rest of our lives, because it's going to be a bit scary, kind of going down this massive shaft in this balloon, not knowing what's below. And they finally make the decision, alright, let's go down to get and find out the Quagmires are here. And that, perfect timing, 5 seconds after they do this is when Jacques and Olivia open the windows of the penthouse and call for Duncan and Isadora. And this is what really frustrates me. Okay. Let's get this over with. So, I mentioned in episode 2 how I didn't like how Justice Strauss literally pulled out the book and was 2 seconds away from changing the entire story, and they did it just to annoy us. And this is that on steroids. Like, literally the entire plot changes if the Baudelaires wait 5 more seconds, or if the volunteers arrive 5 seconds earlier. They all meet up. The Baudelaires say, they meet them, Jacques Snicket probably recognized them, and like, oh wait, hey, what are you doing here? And then they introduce each other, they recognize the librarian, and they go like, we found out where the Quagmires are, they're right at the bottom of the shaft, and the entire story changes. But obviously, that doesn't happen, they tease us like this, and I really don't like it when they do this. It's just annoying as hell. Like, why do you have to do this? You could have just shown them arriving while they were in the shaft, but no, you have to do it to make it painful, so it was like 5 seconds earlier. But obviously, like, I don't get what the whole point of this quote-unquote search. They're not searching anything. You're not going to find the Quagmires by just going up to the floor and yelling their names. And I would give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe they go inside and search it, because they know this is probably the floor, if anywhere, that they're at. The penthouse is full, it has so many rooms, and it's also where Olaf is probably staying, because he was with Esme under the cape. But we find out in the next episode, no, they don't do much. Meanwhile, the Baudelaires finally reach the bottom and meet the Quagmires, and that's where the episode ends. So now that we're done with part one, let's move on to part two, which I think is significantly better. Part one dragged quite a bit. The last 10-20 minutes of the episode were just completely static aside from a side plot. And I just really think the rich people were really pretentious and it didn't help the story much. Olaf's disguises were too ridiculous, it crossed the line. And I think his jokes weren't funny much at all this time. They were just annoying as hell. But this episode is a lot better. And we start off with Lemony Snicket narrating while the Baudelaires are meeting with the Quagmires and going like, yeah, I know it all seems happy. Everyone in this scene is happy, both the Baudelaires and the Quagmires, that they finally met up again and that the Baudelaires are here to rescue them. But trust me, it's not happy. This isn't going to be a happy scene here. And remember, and he foreshadows something that's going to happen later, where the Baudelaires are basically screaming and falling down the shaft for an endless amount of time, and just keep screaming. So we see that foreshadowed later. But and it does by the way, that does happen later in this episode, and it's a pretty good scene. But the Butlers and the Quagmires finally meet up. They're like, "You found us." They're all so happy, and they basically try to figure out, okay, how can we break this lock? The Quagmires basically go like, "We found the book. We found everything. We know the answers. We were all right. Everything is connected." And they basically give the other half the spyglass so that they can use it. They use some of the tricks that the Quagmires learned in the book for the spyglass, but it doesn't work. They can't open this giant lock from this cage, and this cage basically is a plot cage for the entire story. You'll see what I mean later. But this cage basically, they found the Quagmires. They know what they are. Because of this cage and this lock, there's nothing they can do about it because they can't free the Quagmires. So the Quagmires are right there, and they're kind of like, okay, how do we get out of here? How can you rescue us? And they try like melting the lock with the spyglass, but obviously that doesn't work. And then Violet realizes what's on the newspaper, that heat rises, so they can technically use it as a hot air balloon, what they use to come down, to go back up. And this is what I don't get. So first of all, how the hell did the Quagmires get in this cage at the bottom of the shaft? We find out later there is a tunnel. There's like a tunnel that leads to this. There's a secret door, and at the bottom of the shaft, which the Quagmires were obviously bought in through here, which makes sense because otherwise there's no way you could put a cage with two teenagers in it trapped at the bottom of the shaft. You'd have to literally have a crane operation, and obviously that would draw a lot of attention. So they brought them through that passage into the shaft. But what I'm confused by is, like, why don't the Quagmires just tell the Baudelaires that, so they don't have to have this trouble of going back up? Because it's not easy going back up. They do an accurate portrayal of that. Basically, they go up, the thing starts burning, they have to go down again, they start screaming, and then they go up again, and then it literally explodes, and they barely make it back up to the top. Why don't the Quagmires just tell them? Like, they clearly know. They give the Baudelaire, like, Olaf plan. They say Olaf is going to sneak us out in the auction. He's going to hide us in one of the items in the auction and sneak us out. And the Baudelaire's like, no, he's not going to do that. You're coming with us. But I don't get it. Like, they know a lot of what Olaf's going to do. They clearly heard it. Like, and the Quagmires, unlike the Baudelaires, have been here for some time. Like, even if they were like covered up, like, can't they tell, like, there's a door behind them? Like, we literally see later in the story the Baudelaires find the secret door, and it takes them like 5 seconds. And the Quagmires have been here for quite a while, and they don't see that. Like, they could have literally told the Baudelaires this entire story is probably different, but they don't for some reason. And the Butler's like, okay, we need to go back up so we can find something that can rescue you, and maybe we can cut the bars with, or break the lock with. And obviously, we know that's probably not going to happen. And there's a nice sequence. They give their return from kind of like what the Quagmire did last time. They're like, "You saved us. You saved us. We'd be with Olaf if it wasn't for you. And I hope you know." And then they're like, "What?" And he's like, "What friends are for." and that line kind of gets traded between the two pairs of orphans, and I like that back and forth. The line "what friends are for," it does show the connection they have. It's more than just like acquaintances, the people they know. It's like they can trust each other. That shows a certain level of trust that the Quagmires are willing to like let the Baudelaires go back up because they trust that the Baudelaires can find them again, and that they're willing to go all the way and come back and rescue them, and that they'll do everything they can to try. And the Baudelaires would like do the exact same thing with the Quagmires if their circumstances were switched, and that does show how deep of a friendship they've developed. So the Baudelaires basically go back up to the top. Meanwhile, while this is all going on, there are a lot of cuts. I didn't mention the cuts while in the scene. I wanted to go one at a time, but the first cut is of Jacques and Olivia, the librarian. Olivia, I'm gonna call her Olivia from now, and of course Olivia is panicky. Jacques, being the experienced veteran, is a lot more calm. Even he is like, okay, this is not a good situation, but he's a lot more calm to the situation than Olivia. And basically, Jacques is like, the Quagmires can be anywhere but 667 Dark Avenue. And that basically confirms that they're basically, alright, they've crossed that off list, not there. So, my question is, how much time has passed here? I mean, in this entire time, basically since the Baudelaires have basically left, which is basically since the whole distraction happened, they've been eating at Harry Houdini for some time, and Olaf sung a song. How damn long is Olaf's song? It feels like it maybe was like in the show it was like 1 or 2 minutes. It was probably in real life 5 or 10 minutes. The Baudelaires go back, they climb up all those stairs, and they go down. Now, and then right when they go down, that's when the volunteers, Jacques and Olivia, find the penthouse and they start searching it. The Baudelaires were with the Quagmires for what seemed like 5 minutes. Maybe it takes them 10 more minutes to get back up. Maybe it took them like 2 minutes to get down. So let's say 20 minutes as a highball estimate. They could not have searched this entire place thoroughly in 20 minutes. And if they did, they'd have also seen this suspiciously open elevator with this damn balloon. They'd have heard the noises echoing. And if they could not, we know they could not have searched it thoroughly. We know it took Violet a lot longer to search it earlier. So what did they do? Did they even search it, or did they literally just call them out, maybe look through a few rooms that were not there like they did with the previous floors? So they didn't do a thorough search at all. So how Jacques can be so conclusive that the Quagmires aren't there is kind of beyond me. And also, we find out later, I'll get to this point later, otherwise I'm going to spoil a bit too much of the story, actual plot points. So, what happens then is, Olivia is basically, this is really complicated. I feel, I might not want to do this, and that's understandable. She's being like overwhelmed with all this. One day she's just a librarian trying to do good things, trying to live in this like world where everybody else hates books for some reason, but she has a strong literary sense and she's very educated and she's just trying to a good person that's trying to help the orphans, and now she's involved in all the secret organization stuff, this deep conspiracy that stretches back years, and we finally get like our first hints of what happens. And Jacques Snicket talks about like this whole thing is caused by a murder, which is caused by an arson, which is caused by two moving violations, and that's sent from a stolen object, two poisonous darts, and a misdemeanor. And he basically goes into this whole thing, this whole tease basically of how this whole thing started, and she's like, this is all really complicated. I feel like I might not be ready for this. And it tells a lot about this episode where the librarian, a side character, is literally not only the most relatable character of the episode, she's the character that has the biggest story arc and the most character development of this entire episode. And don't get me wrong, it's a really good arc. I feel like they handle it really well. And it's not like just in comparison to everything else is good. Librarian's arc is genuinely a really good story. But the fact that it's the most interesting part of this entire story and not the Baudelaires and their story, I mean, it kind of speaks to how weak this episode kind of is. So, the Baudelaires go back up. meanwhile, Olaf and Esme finally exit their lunch. Jerome is unconscious. They kind of have to carry him back, and Esme is really strong. Like Olaf basically calls his henchpeople. He's like, "Yeah, set up a net. We need a net," and he basically does his own thing. Esme carries Jerome all the way up those stairs to the top. The Baudelaires finally reach the top, and they're like, "Okay, we need to figure out how to find the Quagmires." They close the elevator because they hear someone coming up. They think it's Olaf, but it's actually Esme and carrying Jerome. And Esme sets him down. The Baudelaires can't tell Jerome anything because obviously he's unconscious. And Esme is like, "And you guys are still my children, basically. I've adopted you. You guys are still really important to me." And if I didn't already, this is the moment of the story where if I didn't already know Esme was evil, I might have been slightly convinced, but I would have basically thought after this that she's gonna die, because obviously she does this thing where basically she shows she basically says, I mean, I know, look, I'm really self-obsessed. I'm really rich. But I do care about you guys. I mean, I'm still your guardian. And if you didn't know she was already evil, it would be a plausible argument because genuinely she hasn't done anything so far that's really helped Count Olaf. She hasn't shown any evil tendencies. She just shows the general rich snobbish tendencies, what you generally perceive as a rich self-obsessed person. But she does a good job of it. The actress that's playing Esme does a really good job of it as well. And of course, but we already know she's really shady already. And the Baudelaires unfortunately make their first real mistake of the series, and they trust Esme, and they tell her everything. She acts really surprised, and I really like how Esme does this. I love how she handles this. We know she's evil, but she basically acts unlike all the other adults, she basically goes all right, wow, you guys are really smart. She actually kind of compliments them. She doesn't do it to a point where it's flattery, where it basically inflates their egos, because they're not going to fall for that. But she was like, wow, you guys are really smart. And I feel like the Baudelaires are finally waiting for that vindication, for somebody to understand them, and for some adult to go oh my god, this is terrible. You guys figured this out all by yourself, because it is really impressive how they've we kind of get it, we kind of forget how impressive the Baudelaires are and how smart they are with all the adults being stupid. And they finally kind of get that vindication, and slowly that combined with Esme going, okay, we need to act quickly. We can't just wait and sit around here. Let's call the police. How do we do it as quick as possible? And she's playing with them. We also kind of we get a nice sequence about how she basically kind of throws them off guard with parsley soda and stuff, and then she basically gets them back on guard. She basically does exactly what they wanted all of their previous guardians to do, which is believe that it's Count Olaf, okay, we need to call the authorities right away. We need to do everything we can to arrest Count Olaf. So not only does she believe them, she's willing and ready to act on it, which is basically what the Baudelaires wanted. She's giving them everything they wanted and kind of that vindication. And I mean, it basically because of what she said at the beginning, it doesn't register on them, or rather, it doesn't register on them quick enough that it's probably too good to be true. And of course it is. And basically she we could go down the stairs and we could slide down the banister. She's giving ideas of how they can get down. But kind of like how one of my favorite lines that I've ever heard in movies or TV shows is from Batman Begins. I think it's a really important lesson that Ra's al Ghul teaches Bruce Wayne about surroundings. Always mind your surroundings, Bruce. And the Baudelaires don't mind their surroundings. They don't see where they are. They're right in front of that elevator shaft. And Esme basically opens the shaft. She's like, we'll take the elevator. And she pushes them into the shaft. And that's the reveal that, yep, she's evil. And that's the big reveal. She's laughing maniacally. And we get the foreshadowing that Lemony was talking about earlier. And we get the long fall in the shaft. And this must be terrifying. I mean, they're literally falling for what seems like forever. And they don't know if they feel like they're probably going to die. and then they just land into the net. They're still screaming when they land into the net. This is the part of the main plot that I love, where Esme basically reveals herself, and she's just laughing maniacally. She's different than Count Olaf. Like, Olaf, I mean, he's more of his villainy type. He's just specifically after their fortune. He's single-minded. He wants a specific thing. Esme feels like she's just doing this for the fun of it. She loves being evil. She's helping Count Olaf, and unlike Olaf never really feels like he loves doing what he's doing. He's just doing it. But Esme really loves being evil. She's just laughing as she does it. She's just stomping her feet as they fall, and we finally get the reveal, and we have a nice shouting sequence from the Baudelaires 100 feet below where Esme is, and we get the reveal. Count Olaf, my former acting coach, will get his hands on 2 enormous fortunes, and we get the reveal. Yes, she was working with Olaf the whole time, and the most important part about this sequence, funnily enough, it's not even in the main plot. It has nothing to do with the Esme throwing the Baudelaires down the shaft and trapping them basically in this net so that they can be smuggled out along with the Quagmires with Olaf. That's not even the most important part. The most important part here is when she kind of gives some hints to her motivation. It's not just to help Count Olaf. We know now, we find out, especially more later in this episode, she's involved in this whole thing too, kind of. This whole secret organization thing, she's involved in it too, and she's like, I want to steal from you, like Beatrice stole from me. And the reason this is important is this is the first time in the entire story that we've heard the name Beatrice mentioned by anyone outside of Lemony Snicket. And Lemony Snicket is narrating from the future, so it basically confirms his connection to the story. We knew he was connected already. We saw the picture of him and Olaf. We saw Olaf going and Larry kind of talking about, isn't he dead? And we know his brother is there. But we know more oh, so Lemony and Lemony's former love that he has some connection to is actually a key part of this story, because Esme mentions her basically as her motivation, and that's kind of the first time we get that connection between Lemony Snicket and the present versus the actual events of the story. So she and Olaf basically leave them in the shaft, and they're basically stuck in an even worse position as usual than they were earlier. So we cut back to Jacques and Olivia, and basically Olivia's like, I want to go back, and Jacques like, well, I have to take you as a taxi driver wherever you want, but I'm a volunteer also, and I don't really want you. We really need you to be part of this. And she basically asked to know why, and Jacques like, okay, I can tell you, but we're gonna have to take a really long drive, and she's basically gonna tell her how this all started and why they do what they do, which I think is going to be a really important part of the story. But then we cut back to Esme and Olaf, and the last thing Jacques said was, remember I mentioned earlier, was something about the moving violation, 2 civil suits and poison darts, a stolen object, and a misdemeanor, and a murder that led to an arson, which was part of the kidnapping of the Quagmire triplets. So we cut to Olaf and Esme, and they're basically they're not having that stereotypical evil the evil couple thing. They're staring over the whole city, because now they basically fooled everybody. The Baudelaires are trapped now. They can't do anything either. Jerome's unconscious. The Quagmires are somewhere. The Baudelaires, we see them shout down to the shaft to see if the Quagmires are still there, but they don't answer, so they're probably gone and still trapped. And the Baudelaires are also trapped in the net. And so Esme kind of re-narrates that whole thing Jacques Snicket just said, and she says, and it ends with 3 orphans trapped in the net, and 2 more being smuggled out to the auction house. And she's like, I love a happy ending. And so we also get confirmation that Olaf and Esme, it's not actually just an actor code thing. They've had a long history and some connection in the past. And Esme only married Jerome because of the elevator shaft. So this elevator shaft is really important. And then basically they Olaf, as they do their whole it's basically the standard. I feel like I've seen it so many times before in movies where the villains think everything's over and they basically do their celebrations, and obviously it's not over. So they just start dancing. We get a few moments in this where I start to question, like, is this really PG? Because we get Ethvik like trying to basically, you know what I mean. But but they end up just doing some dancing. They basically are really, they end up getting really into it. And meanwhile, Sunny basically climbs the entire length of the shaft because there's a lot of piping in the shaft. That's, even though the shaft has no elevator or cables, there's still piping there. And she basically climbs up the entire shaft. Every time she falls, she uses her really sharp teeth to grip into the wall. And so she's basically using her teeth in her hands to help her climb up the shaft. And she gets all the way back up to the door. And I find the next part kind of hilarious also because it builds on kind of the connection she somehow had. It's really weird. I never would have thought like this worked. A baby and a guy with hooks for hands, but it's like one of the most consistent themes of the series, where we saw it in the previous episode for a bit when Hooky was like scared that Olaf had just kicked her, but it was really just a dummy her. We saw in like the first episode where they had that little poker face off, and basically now she's basically escaped, and the management regrets it cannot allow any orphans to escape. And he says something really interesting to her. He's like, you're clever. You could join us instead of surrendering your fortune if you could play your cards right. And she basically goes like, nah. And we get some more funny exchanges between them. It helps that Hooky understands what she's saying, and unlike the rest of Olaf's henchmen and Olaf himself, and she basically tricks him by, like, she sneaks in once she manages to distract him enough through the door and stuffs a rug between between the door so he can't get back in and stop her, and he keeps trying to break it open after he knocked on it for what seems like 5 to 10 minutes, and he can't get through. And Sunny basically sneaks around while Olaf and Esme are dancing, and she gets the cape that was used earlier, as well as a really, really, really long rope. So she basically sneaks back out, gets a soda as well, and once she gets out, we get some more stuff between Hooky and Sunny, where she basically gives him the soda, and he's like, "You're not bribing your way out of this," and then she just goes back in the shaft. She's like, "Oh, okay, well, the boss can't yell at me anymore," so she goes back. He basically lets her off the hook. He doesn't tell about anything that happened or anything she did. He basically lets her off the hook, and she gets all the stuff back. Instead of going up, they basically try to go down. So they tie the rope that she got, and they all slide to the net, and they all slide down to the bottom. And they're at the bottom, and the Quagmires aren't there anymore, obviously. And this is what I was talking about earlier. Literally, it takes them 5 seconds to notice that there's a kind of doorway there. There's kind of a brick. The bricks are aligned in a certain way that look pretty suspicious. Literally, Violet pushes it forward, and there is the doorway. And this is the part of the episode that I feel like undermines everything that's happened so far. Like, I mentioned why I was annoyed by so many things with the Jacques Snicket subplot line and the Baudelaire being so narrowly close to avoiding each other. They literally have to write the plot so these two forces don't collide and solve the whole story. Well, this is why. Because obviously, this passage, this doorway, leads to the same tunnels that we've been seeing Lemony roam through this entire series. So we know now what these tunnels are. They're the tunnels of this secret organization that Jacques is a part of, that we find out Esme was a part of, and she married Jerome for this shaft that had and the shaft was kind of like a starting point of these tunnels, or a point. These tunnels are like this massive network. We see several signs. We assigned to Montgomery's house. We see a sign that says Baudelaire. We see like everything. So these tunnels seem to connect everything, and it's so the Quagmires could have easily like pointed out like, hey, there's this massive tunnel system. Even if like, let's say we see later that when the white-faced women are dragging the Quagmires like back towards the auction house, that like that they're being covered, but like they know how they should at least know that they're brought in through this tunnel, and if the Baudelaires could just smuggle them out, like and we saw earlier in the series Jacqueline and Larry meet up in this tunnel. We saw Jacqueline talking in this tunnel several times. This is the same tunnel Count Olaf has escaped in several times, both in the systems in episode 1 where he escaped the stage, and in episode 2 where he basically escaped the labyrinth and Jacqueline chased after him through the labyrinth. And I'm like, okay, so why didn't Jacques Snicket and the VF and all why didn't Jacques Snicket and all these secret agents think of that like in the first place? They know there's this secret tunnel here. They know there's this secret shaft here. If they're thinking he's hiding it in the building, I mean, they're thinking he's hiding them in 667 Dark Avenue. Why didn't they go through this tunnel to the bottom in the first place and try to rescue them, or at least when they were done? I mean, that should have been like the first thing that crossed their mind after they couldn't find the Quagmires after a quote-unquote search. Just go back to the underground tunnel and find them from there. You know about these tunnels. You know there's one right there, but they don't for some reason. And also, I guess the Baudelaires find this tunnel, and then basically they walk for what seems, I guess, is like 10-20 minutes maybe. They reach the closest destination. They go up to it, and and they do the scene pretty well. It's basically they open the cover and they see ashes, and we know what it's gonna be. Before it even happens, we know exactly what it's gonna be. But this is delayed. They can't go above ground because right there, once again, we see somebody walking right there. They can't see them obviously, but the Baudelaires see their foot. They're walking right by, and as the foot goes down, they see the tattoo of that symbol, which looks like an eye, and that's the hallmark of Count Olaf. And I guess so far in the series, Count Olaf has been the only one with this tattoo. It's how they've recognized him. Every single time Mr. Poe, I guess, sees that tattoo as something very special that's particular to Count Olaf. So that surely must be Count Olaf. That's the only way. They narrowly avoided him. Again, congratulations. Just stay down here so you can avoid Count Olaf. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you want to see this, it is not Count Olaf. It is Jacques Snicket. And it's kind of cool how they show the legs walking past. We can immediately tell. We know the way they shoot this, it's not going to be Count Olaf. We see like the thing he's kind of wearing, and then he puts his leg on this taxi, and then his like hand brushes off the ashes, and Jacques Snicket. He and Olivia are there looking over the ashes. This is probably where he brought her as part of the story to tell her. And that just further solidifies what we already know, that the Baudelaire fire and the Baudelaire parents had to do with the secret organization that Jacques Snicket was a part of. And yeah, it's Jacques Snicket and the Baudelaires were right there. Again, the story is basically built across having the Baudelaire plotline and the Jacques Snicket plotline, and having them literally be so close together, but the whole story is built around them specifically not meeting, because they can't meet, because if they do meet, then the rest of the story doesn't happen that was written in the books. So yeah, that I found really annoying. Like, why do you have, like, I get it, you can't have them meet, but why do you have to make it like so close? It gets really annoying when you do that. So anyway, she basically, the Olivia, the librarian, she understands now. She's like, yeah, I get it now. I see what happened. And we get the big reveal. This story started with a stolen sugar bowl from Esme Squalor. And then she's like, but it can end with Count Olaf. Like, they're all trying to end this quote-unquote story tonight, depending on what that means. So, we saw earlier an image, like, while Violet was on the tour, we was investigating the plays in Esme's room. There was basically this tea set, and the sugar bowl was basically missing. It had a few pieces of sugar there, but it looked like it hadn't been touched in forever. And because it hasn't, that's what she's like. That's probably what like being referred to when like she's like, Beatrice stole it from me. And we know this whole thing revolves now around this sugar bowl that used to belong to Esme Squalor but was stolen. And this is where they give us that reveal. And she says, but it can end with Count Olaf. So Jacques, Snicket, and Olivia drive away. They're basically like, we need to get to Veblen Hall in time for this auction, which apparently is going to happen pretty soon already. And I feel like the time pass is unclear here. They don't really make it clear. It was night when they left. When they left the 667 Dark Avenue after failing their search, and I guess it's morning. It's like around 9 o'clock now, so I guess that's reasonable. It probably took Jacques a while to explain to Olivia the entire history of this thing, but meanwhile, I guess the Baudelaires were stuck in the shaft for a really long time until Sunny finally crawled her way all the way out, and then basically saved them. Sunny bailed them out basically, and now they're basically back, just waiting for quote unquote Count Olaf to leave, but we know it's really Jacques Snicket. So, so once they feel it's safe, they open the gate, the secret tunnel, and they find out. Of course, we see this. It's their house. It's their burnt down house. I think the reactions are pretty good. Like to seeing this is the first time like since that initial episode 1 scene we've seen that they're back, seeing the remains of their house, and I mean, obviously the emotions aren't the same as the first time. They're still are there, but also now they have that admission like, why would there be a tunnel between 667 Dark Avenue and our house? And the Sonny's like, what does it mean? So now this just adds to the mystery. It confirms everything they could have possibly thought of, like, that, okay, well, maybe Esme and all really are connected to our parents, just not in a good way, and now there's a tunnel between their house and ours for some reason that we don't even know. And they're like, our parents couldn't have known about this. And they're like, no, they definitely could have. They kind of accept that because after what they went through with dealing with their parents' death and their reputation in the Miserable Male episodes, even they know as well as we do, their parents definitely could have and probably did know about the tunnel and probably did know about Esme, which Jerome said several times throughout this episode. Before they have much time to think about it, Mr. Poe shows up out of nowhere, and they basically force him to give them a ride. He doesn't really want to, but he has to because I guess he's in charge of them, and at least he gives them a ride, to be fair to Mr. Poe. I spent a lot of time bashing him, so I'll give him credit where credit is due. I will not give his wife that because she deserves absolutely no credit. She's just trying to make a headline out of everything, and does it once again here. And basically they finally get to the quote unquote in auction. And I forgot to mention, while they're in the shaft, they studied the catalog and they saw an item called VFD, which, as you remember, was the letters that the Quagmires shouted as they were escaping, which clearly means it's very important. And this also brings me to another plot hole, like what the Quagmires told them. They could have like told them so much more. At least like they know everything. Just give the Baudelaires like the books you wrote them down in now, so they can at least know. Because you already know everything now. But I digress. So the Baudelaires are driven to the inn auction, which has already started. We see a bit of it where they're trying to auction off the signed poster of Count Olaf, which obviously nobody wants. I guess the auction started a lot earlier because they already get through the first 47 lots pretty fast. that Lot 48 arrives. It's basically this giant fish that looks like a herring. It's painted red from the Herring Houdini restaurant, and one of Olaf's henchmen basically jokes around and buys it, and it's basically for an unspecified amount that we don't even know. But obviously, it doesn't really matter. He has no money. It's Olaf's money. Olaf basically is buying it from himself, but obviously nobody knows that, and nobody cares that it's for an undetermined amount of money because nobody even wants the thing, like half the items on the list. But then the Baudelaires arrive around the time where this red herring item is being sold, and it's not just them that's arriving, because Jacqueline and Larry the waiter are arriving too, and Larry's already there. He basically Jacqueline gets in because she's on the list, and she kind of makes a little bit of a joke there. She makes up a fake name as Jessica Haircut, that kind of like this name Count Olaf used for her in the first episode as the disguise, which she did not fall for at all. She's like, Jessica Haircut, really? But Mr. Poe, the idiot he is, fell for it. So Jacqueline gets in. The bouncer's the bald man. But literally, like, well, Count Olaf wants us captured. If you let us in, that's basically like capturing us, and they basically get let in. And then so everybody is converging on this auction thing. It's kind of going to be one of those things where everybody's there. It's a big showdown, and finally something happens. So Esme and Olaf are basically doing the auction, and then they see the Baudelaires just walk in there. They're supposed to be trapped, and their looks are, you could see the looks on their face just like completely drop. So like, really? Again? Like, Olaf's like, you guys escaped again? How many damn times am I gonna get you and then you're gonna escape? Like, you could see, like, from both sides, the Baudelaires have escaped a lot of close situations. Like, literally, Olaf's tapped them so many times and they just keep escaping. From, like, the first time where they used the right hand technicality, to where Olaf literally had them after Monty died, but literally because he was scared off by a bunch of animals, they escaped. And then he barely escaped them. Also, what Jacqueline tried to track him down, but then obviously Olaf escaped there also. And then the Baudelaires barely escaped Captain Jam because Mr. Poe was so stupid he bought everything, and then literally they had to run away, and then they barely escaped the lumber mill where Count Olaf nearly got them to kill the owner, and basically almost had them sent to him. He had Klaus hypnotized. He almost won, and ended up losing only because like he had his own insecurities with Dr. Orwell. They started arguing, and then like that triggered Violet to remember like the word that would unhypnotize Klaus. Maybe she would have found it anyway, but whatever. And then the last episode, they didn't really win at all because nothing happened. Their friends just got captured. So I mean, I get where that's coming from, but I digress. I feel like I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here. So Count Olaf skips on lot 49. Basically, he hands the vase on somebody, and it's lot 50, I think, and and maybe it's lot 49. I don't know. I don't even know what it is anymore. But he basically starts the auction. It's the box with VFD, and it has a bunch of air holes in it, which is implying that maybe the Quagmires are in that box. And basically, the Baudelaires are like asking Mr. Poe if they can use the fortune to bid on it. He says no, but Mr. Poe actually trying to be charitable. Like, he decides to get into the spirit of being charitable, because of the function's quote unquote name, of charitable function. It really, all the money goes to Esme and Count Olaf, who everyone thinks is Gunther for some reason. But then so Mr. Poe makes a bid, and there's this old woman that also wants the box video. They keep going back and forth a bit. And then also Olaf's henchman, the henchperson of indeterminate gender, that's what they credit him in the credits, is basically a lot to use this also. And what they do is they keep bidding back and forth, and basically that Mr. Poe eventually gives up, and he's like, I can't bid any higher than this. And right when it seems like all hope is lost and they can't get the bid, Jerome Squaller walks in, and he's like, and he kind of like, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm late. I must have eaten something bad. Like everybody knows, he's just looking at Esme. He's finally like lost it with her. He finally like he stands up for the Baudelaires, and he's like, well, you know what? I don't care if they want this random box with holes in it. So what? I'm their guardian, and I'm gonna bid on it for them and make sure they get it. So and then Esme bids against him, and finally Jerome actually stands up to her and bids back for the Baudelaires against Esme. And the next scene, I mean, it doesn't amount to much, but I love it. It's chaotic, and I mean, in this episode, I don't really like the pretentiousness of the environment and the rich people a lot, which I guess is the point, but it still doesn't work. And I guess crazy is the best thing to possibly have, because what happens next is basically crazy. They basically all start breaking their covers. Nobody really cares anymore. But then Mr. Poe bids again. Then the old lady bids again. After Jerome and Esme go back and forth a few times, then Larry literally breaks his cover and starts talking about about literatures and morals. And then Olaf literally speaks in his normal voice and starts and talking about like existential crises and bids again. I think he bids 210. And then literally Jacques, Snicket, and Olivia Caliban literally run through the door, and they open it and run through the door and say 212. And that's the moment where like Olaf realizes that they're there, and he's like, and that is the first time, except for where Lemony Snicket is briefly mentioned, this is the first time where he looks scared. He looks at them and he's like, oh shoot, this guy's here. And he's like, Snicket. And this is the only time in the entire series, present day, that Count Olaf has actually looked scared. And maybe it's not even because of like what Jacques Snicket could do, maybe just because like what any past he might have had with Jacques Snicket. But Jacques and Olivia show up and say 212. I guess they somehow knew the number. Maybe they were hearing all the commotion. I noticed how they guess like too high, so maybe they did that just in case, because they just heard commotion and came in. Probably took some time to break through the security guard, but they did it because they're super spies now, I guess. And basically, then everybody keeps bidding. They keep repeating. Uh, Jacqueline throws him in a bid. The two white-faced women throw in a bid. It's pretty hilarious. But and like the hook-handed man's been knocked out. Larry and Jacqueline knocked him out earlier and replaced him. Basically, the white-faced women and Jacqueline are fighting on stage. Mr. Poe bids again. Jerome Scholar bids again, I think. The old lady bids again, and then like the last person to bid is Count Olaf's henchperson, won the other one, and it basically goes to what to it almost where it's almost done. They almost missed an opportunity basically because they almost call it for the henchperson of indeterminate gender, because there's a good enough amount of time where nobody says anything, but they're just all arguing, and then Sunny raises her hand and auction thing. I don't know what to call it, and she just says something, and usually we see green subtitles for what she says, but to increase the suspense, they don't say anything, and then we understand what she said. She said 1,000, which is obviously way above what anyone says, and the salary actually comes from what I guess she was paid a pretty good amount to be that damn idiot Nero's vice principal, the vice principal Nero's secretary, and she actually got paid for that, so she has the money somehow. But basically, they're like, oh, okay, and they're basically forced to give it to let the Baudelaires have the package. As you expect, basically the Baudelaires go up and like, the only thing that's over is your awful plan. They rant about like it's illegal to auction off children. Everybody's gonna see what you did, and your plan's gonna be exposed. And they like try and open the box, and while they're opening it, Olaf basically walks up, mocks them a bit, like because they're trying to tell everyone the Quagmires are in the box. Obviously, they're not going to be in the box. But that's going to be the twist. It's not much of a twist because everybody saw it coming. They're not in the box, obviously. And then Olaf basically punctures the box open and flips it over, and it just doilies, just very fancy doilies. That's what the VFDs in this scenario. Obviously, not the one that the Quagmires found in this scenario. That's what they stood for, and that it's basically a complete letdown. Everybody thought it was right there, but it wasn't. And then, the Baudelaires are basically just completely embarrassed right now because they were so sure the Quagmires are there. They told everybody, and they, for once, were actually wrong. But then Olaf was clumsy, and he let his knife blade hit his boot several times, and it came open, and the tattoo is right there now. And now all of a sudden, everyone sees he has a tattoo on the ankle. They're a bit slow, but they catch on to it. They catch on. He's Count Olaf, and finally, this felt like the best time, the time where they could finally catch them. And Esme tries to ward off, don't come foreigner for your problem, and everyone finally Jerome speaks up like some adult has common sense, he's not a foreigner, he's from the same country we're in. She's like, you can't arrest someone for that, and Klaus was finally manages to talk sense into everyone, he's a criminal, and Mr. Poe finally is okay, yes, we need to arrest him, no excuses, get this guy out here, he's dangerous. And they're finally all ready to there. All of the public is there. Olaf is basically trapped. He can't even escape through a back or side route because Larry and Jacqueline are right on either side of him, and he can't escape. And so literally, he's right there, and everybody's surrounding him. Everybody's ready to catch him. This is the best chance they have. They know it's Olaf now. He's completely exposed, and this time, the next minute or so, just embodies the entire episode, because the way they get out of this is the most incredibly stupid way possible. Literally, the newspaper biker comes in again. Olaf is completely trapped. He's caught, basically. He and Esme are basically gonna be caught. And I forgot. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention this part. So before the stupid thing happens with the bicycle driver, what they do is Esme basically shares her story. She kind of tries to do what she did with the Baudelaires, basically with everyone. We obviously the Baudelaires and none of us buy it, but she does a good delivery job where she's like, my life has felt really empty, even though I'm basically rich. And then she basically goes I always knew there was something missing, and I didn't know what it was until I took in 3 orphans, and obviously, and then she does the best heel turn ever where she's like, it was Count Olaf, and she's she's so awesome, he's everything I wanted, I missed him, and she basically just goes completely all out. She loves being evil, she loves being Count Olaf, so I guess now she's his girlfriend, and she basically goes completely all out. She exposes them. She doesn't care anymore, basically, and they're basically now ready to escape, but they can't. Mr. Poe is right there. Jacqueline is right there. Larry's right there. Everybody's right there. Olaf's completely cornered. The Baudelaires are right there as well. Jacques, Snicket, and Olivia Caliban are at the doorstep also. So he's surrounded on all sides. And then we get back to the newspaper guy. And the headline literally says, Vebwin Hall out, Milton Friedman Hall in. And everybody starts stampeding out the other way. It's what? It's so what? It says that. It's so what if it says that? You're still here. Olaf is still here. Who cares if that's what the headline reads? No, why should they care? Why should they all leave and stampede so that the entrance isn't locked anymore? Distract everybody, provide Olaf the distraction he needs, then he can just escape through the underground tunnel that led to Vebwin Hall in the first place, which makes sense to how he got there, and then lock it so that they couldn't open it from above with his staff, which is actually pretty smart. But they gave him the distraction he needed, and they gave him they stopped Jacques and Olivia from chasing after him, and Mr. Poe, they basically blocked the entire one direction of everybody else from getting to Olaf. So it's what are you guys doing? This is so incredibly stupid. I talked about all the ways Olaf escaped earlier, but this is ridiculous. I mean, I just can't believe it. But Olaf and Esme escape, and everybody is left confused. Everybody else is gone except for Mr. Poe and his wife, Jacqueline and Larry, and the Baudelaires. And Jacques and Olivia have basically been stampeded outside. So they're outside now, and Jacques says, like, I know where to find Olaf. I know where he's going next. Veblen Hall might be the end of the line, but it's the start of the tunnel, implying like they're going to be a major part in the next story. So basically, the Baudelaires go like, yeah, they weren't. I guess the Quagmires weren't really in that box. That like the fun sequence where Larry and Jacqueline repeat exactly what they say, and then they're like, it was a red herring, and then like it was a red herring, and then they finally hit send like red herring. It's like it was that red herring that was auctioned as the first thing, which is incredibly clever. It's incredibly clever storytelling technique, as in like red herring being a, a literal red herring where that the Quagmires are trapped in, and that we see put on top of Olaf's cars. His troop just drives it away, and that was auctioned off earlier. And a red herring being like a storytelling technique, like a false, misleading clue that was the letters VFD, and it had nothing to do with what the Quagmires were saying. That was just a misleading thing that Olaf used to his full advantage, and it worked 100%. So I thought that part was really, really clever. I just thought the way Olaf escaped was complete BS. Like, come on, you have to be able to write the story better. You can't come up with that kind of story and just have such a contrived way for to end it. But I mean, what happens is the Baudelaires basically go outside. The car's driven off. The red herring is long gone now, and Jerome basically shows up, and I really like the scene. He's like, I'm still your guardian. You guys can still be safe with me. You can forget all about Count Olaf and the Quagmires. Let somebody else handle that. Like, you guys are kids. Live your life with me. I'm awake from Esme's treachery. Like, I don't need to do any of this anymore. I know what's up now, and he has a point, but this is, I think, where the Baudelaires make their decision. This is their flashpoint moment, I think, and that a decision that ultimately is going to haunt them because they have the opportunity of forgetting all about it and being safe, but they know, like, well, Olaf can just show up again. Now they're like, Jerome is like rich. He can just let's they're living in literal penthouse. I mean, Olaf shows up again and does what? Jerome, like, at this point, he's going to have to believe them. And he seems pretty sincere. He will believe them probably. But they know no place is going to be safe with Count Olaf. And even if they could have some semblance of safety living with Jerome Squalor, like, they need to find their friends. That's all that matters to them anymore. And they need to find the real VFD because they're now the biggest clues they have are the letters, but these letters were misleading. They need to find the real VFD, and they need to find the Quagmires, and this is where, like, everything that they've been through, all the secrets have kind of gotten to too much, where now, instead of making the decision to just keep themselves safe and do what's best for only them, now this is where all their experiences have kind of added up, and they're like, okay, no, we need to go on the offensive now. This is like, we need to figure this out. We need to rescue the Quagmires and find out what VFD is. And they kind of make that decision. And Jerome's like, this is all too dangerous. You guys don't need to be living this life of danger. And I really like, because we've seen he's really scared. I mean, this guy, that's the way a lot of a lot of people are. And I feel like Jerome is the most normal person in this story. Olivia is the most relatable, as in she's just a really good person who just wants to help people, and she ends up in this complicated world. But Jerome is kind of what the normal person is. Just, even if the Baudelaires are right, like, if they're wrong, and if they're right, well, that's even worse, because then it's just going to be scary, and what are we going to do? The best thing is to just ignore it, in his opinion. And that's what a lot of people would do. Like, the Baudelaires are honestly, if they didn't know what we saw, and even if they did, I wouldn't blame them for, like, not taking them in, because the Baudelaires might be more trouble than they're worth, because Count Olaf's just going to hunt them down every time. And Jerome sees that, but he's willing to offer them a home, and he's just like, you guys can, like, well, you guys can just forget about Count Olaf, but they know that's not only is that not possible, even if they want, even if it was possible, they really can't after everything that they've been through with Count Olaf. And the biggest part is it's not going to be possible. Olaf's just going to find them, and the Quagmires are still going to be kidnapped, and they can't let that go anymore. and they're committed to that now. And Jerome's like, your mother always said I wasn't brave enough. I guess she was right, and she was also right about Esme and how she only married me for a tunnel. And he basically fires them. I guess he basically stops being their guardian. He abandons them. He lets them go. He's like, I can't be your guardian anymore, basically. And he wishes them luck. He's like, I wish you luck. I think you're gonna need it. And now the Baudelaires are basically they're basically gonna, even though they might have another guardian, they're gonna be the ones that are driving the plot, which I think is a great change. So now Mr. Poe comes along, and obviously he's not at this point he's not even surprised that Jerome Squalor doesn't want to be their guardian. He's like, yeah, like normally that would be a surprise and a big shock, but given your guys' track record, I'm not even surprised. We've already come up with a backup plan, and basically there's the village that wants to take in children, and it's called VFD. And immediately, among hearing that, the Baudelaires are like, "Yep, we're going there." And so now they're headed off to the village of VFD to figure out what's going on. And Count Olaf is basically following them. And then we see Jacques Snicket in the background, and he waiting for Count Olaf to show up, and because he knew where he's going apparently. And so he sees Count Olaf with the red herring on top of the car, and um, then Jacques Snicket follows Count Olaf. So we're in this little three-way chase at the end of the episode. All right. So overall, like I did like these two episodes. I know it seems like I don't. I did like them, but they were by far the worst of the series. I mean, by quite a good margin. They, even though like ratings wise they might not be that much lower, in terms of enjoyability, in terms of watchability, in terms of substance and character development, they were so much worse than any of the previous episodes. I mean, it tells you volumes when the best character, the most intriguing character, the most developed character, and really what feels like the main character of the story is literally the librarian and not the Baudelaires, which tells you like the Baudelaires didn't really do much in the story. I mean, so much happens in the story, and at the same time, nothing happens at all. Like literally, they spent half an episode sitting. Here's what they do: they go to to rich people. They stay in the rich people's house and accomplish nothing for half the episode. They eat and accomplish nothing for half the episode. Then they find the Quagmire. And the second episode is a lot better. So the first episode, basically nothing happens. Second episode, they fall into the shaft. They're stuck in the shaft. They go to the auction. They fail. And that's it. And, I mean, it really feels like that this is a massive slowdown. Everything kind of just came to a halt in that first episode. Even the second episode, I mean, not much happened. I did like the whole seeing their house again, and there was a lot of moving parts there, but in the first episode especially, watching them just be in two locations for like the entire episode and do pretty much nothing was a bit off-putting. I mean, we saw in like the wide window how everything was so fast moving. They were going from place to place to place, to going through sailing through hurricanes, finding their aunt, like trying to get sense into these adults, screaming to like try and get them to understand, being like the brunt of Mr. Poe, and then like we saw them, they were just basically running around, and the story was exciting, and here the story just really slowed to a complete halt, and I didn't like that. But I think the thing that props this episode up is the side plots are really good. I really liked everything with Jacques Snicket and Olivia. I think the connection they built there is great. I still think Jacques Snicket is the best supporting character of the series so far, and I think like I talk about how they didn't really do much with the Baudelaires. I mean they didn't, but they weren't bad either. I mean there was nothing negative there. It just was there was nothing special there either, which is why I can't really give this high rating. And I feel like they handled Esme's like turn to evil or reveal of evil really well. I like how she just loves being evil, whereas Count Olaf is very specific in his motivation, whereas Esme just loves being evil, and I guess she loves Count Olaf. And so overall, I think I'll give episode 1 uh 5.5. which is just above average, but episode 2 I give it a 6.5. So overall, I give these 2 episodes a 6. If you guys are still here, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Please feel free to like the video and subscribe. Please leave down any comments and feedback if you think you have any feedback. And I will see you all next time with the next video.